Capital City Sunday.
An overwhelming majority of voters believe the nation is deeply divided over their most important values, and many have doubts in democracy itself, according to studies conducted by Pew Research Center. Their studies show an increasingly stark disagreements between Democrats and Republicans on the economy, racial justice, climate change, and law enforcement. During the 2020 presidential election, the political divide grew even more. This Pew Research study, conducted a month before the election, shows one party believed a victory by the other party would lead to lasting harm to the United States. 89% of Trump supporters surveyed said they would be very concerned about the country's direction if Biden was elected to office. That's about the same on the other side of the aisle. 90% of Biden supporters said they would be very concerned if President Trump was elected to a second term. And 8% surveyed say they would be concerned about Trump being reelected, but didn't believe it would result in lasting harm to the U.S. One group working to bridge the political divide and transform American politics is the Millennial Action Project. Joining us now is their founder and CEO, Steven Olikara. Steven, thanks for coming back on the program and good to see you.
Emilee, great to see you. Thanks for having me.
Absolutely. I first want to ask you, how did we get here? What do you believe caused our nation, our state, to become so politically divided?
Well, this problem has been in the works for decades, and I remind people it's going to take us a long time to get out of this mess. We've had a political industry that increasingly profits on conflict and divisiveness. So anytime you think about any industry, whether it's politics or something else, when there's an incentive to do something and people make a lot of money off of it, then you're going to see more behavior headed in that direction. So you see where political demonization and political contempt is profitable in terms of not only money, raising money for candidates and for parties, but also it's profitable in the sense that it gets you more votes at times because fear and anger are always powerful motivators for people. And then the third thing is now social media, which is like putting gasoline on a fire. It just has more of an incentive with the interest in getting more and more likes, where having this type of dialogue is more incentivized. But I think longer term, that's extremely disruptive and destructive for a diverse democracy like ours. So when you just project out longer term, you think, okay, this status quo politics is not going to work. And in a pandemic like this, it's even deadly as well.
Yeah, social media is definitely a big factor now in politics, especially. Now, you're from Wisconsin, but you also do a lot of work in D.C. How would you rank Wisconsin compared to other states when it comes to political polarization?
Well, it's an interesting experience because I still remember being in college at UW-Madison, walking into the state capitol for the first time. I was working on some clean energy work and seeing that I was one of the few people talking to Democrats and Republicans because it just seemed to make sense that you have to build a coalition to get something over the finish line. But at that time, I didn't fully appreciate where Wisconsin stood in the national picture. And as you referenced, now through Millennial Action Project, I've traveled across the country working in state legislatures with young leaders who want to be bridging that divide. But I've been able to put Wisconsin in a larger context. And to me, it felt like the polarization here was the highest that I had seen. And then one of our partners, the National Conference of State Legislatures, did a study on polarization, and they affirmed what I'd been thinking, which is Wisconsin is usually ranked in the top 3 of most polarized states in the country.
Now, I also hear a lot of times that people ended friendships or don't talk to certain family members because of their political beliefs. So what are some ways people can have healthy disagreements over politics?
Well, this is so important because we are about to, have the holiday season and we'll be talking with family members. And you're absolutely right. We're seeing more and more friendships just frayed. And sometimes I had a friend the other day telling me that, she had to put one of her friendships on pause just because she felt like she was being vilified for her political beliefs. So I think there are 3 things that we got to focus on. One is understanding that those in power are manipulating us to hate each other, and remembering that we cannot hate our fellow human beings. Dr. King had this great line. He said, we don't necessarily have to like everyone, but we do have to love everyone. And that's a more powerful thing. The second thing I think we have to do is try and have empathy. That's a choice we can make. It's hard to do at times, but it's a muscle that I think we have to exercise over time. As you know, Emilee, in Wisconsin for 2 years, Millennial Action Project did our red and blue dialogues where it was explicitly about trying to exercise that muscle of empathy. And then the third thing we got to do is support leaders in public office who believe in the politics of cooperation, of compassion, and have the courage to build coalitions.
Absolutely. Now, what do you think it will take for political tensions to die down, or is this just the new normal people should expect?
Well, I think we can't accept it as the new normal. We have to understand that at our core here in Wisconsin, anyone who visits our state, the number one thing that they notice is the hospitality, the generosity, the kindness. That's truly who we are, and we can't lose sight of that. We can't let this extreme rhetoric kind of drown out who we really are as Wisconsinites. And so I think it's going to take some time, but we need both systemic changes in how we do politics. That's one of the reasons why I support a number of voting reforms and campaign finance reforms to try and address those systemic factors. But it's also a cultural and a human thing as well. Politics is a human endeavor. And so I strongly believe that in politics, we all have a dark side and a light side. And we can either appeal to the darkest impulses in people, or we can appeal to, as Lincoln said, the better angels. And I think we need leaders who do the latter.
Now, there will be new leadership at the White House as President-elect Joe Biden begins his transition. But during Biden's campaign, he pledged to bridge the gap in bitter divisions in our society, seeking to be the president of all people, regardless of party. Do you think this type of message is resonating with Republicans?
I think it varies. When I talk to my Republican friends, in some cases, it did resonate, I would say disproportionately in suburbs like suburban Milwaukee. But in other places, they saw him as just part of the failed establishment, and that message had trouble cutting through. I think the proof is in the pudding. It's not enough just to talk about those things. And I'm glad President-elect Biden, spoke to the need for healing. But it has to translate into action. And that's reflected in the people you hire and surround yourself with. It's reflected in some of your early actions of how you invite people in instead of writing people off. And too often we do have politicians who say the right thing, but then they don't back it up with action. And the credibility really comes from your actions.
Steven Olikara, founder and CEO of the Millennial Action Project. Thank you for coming on the program and talking about this topic.
Hey, thanks for having me.